Hey everyone, Arloon here, coming to you with another guide, this time not for a character but for a hidden mechanic in the game, which the theory crafting community calls elemental gauges. It's slightly complicated, so I'm going to do my best to simplify and visualize it for you. Before we get to that though, here's what you need to know. When you do an elemental attack, these elemental attacks can either be a weak elemental attack or a strong elemental attack. It depends on the skill that the character has in order to determine if it will be a weak or a strong elemental attack. While this won't affect the raw damage of a character, it can affect the elemental reactions and which characters can support each other effectively or not. For these tests, I'm using a low star weapon for all the characters. Artifacts remain, but they shouldn't affect much because of no base attack. If you've done the Abyss, then you probably have an idea on which characters do weak or strong elemental attack. So for our first test here, we have Diluc, who actually does weak elemental attacks, despite him carrying a claymore. So as you can see here, when the Fatui uses his shield, and I use my E, it does about 1/4 of the Fatui's shield HP. This is because Diluc is using weak elemental attacks and not strong elemental attacks. Let me show you with Bennett, who actually does strong elemental attacks, and let me show you how much damage, or not really damage, but shield damage Bennett can do it in place of Diluc. So Bennett's E does strong elemental attack, and as you can see, it does about half the HP of the Fatui shield, so 2 attacks will remove the shield because it is a strong elemental attack. Xiangling's Goba also does weak elemental attack, as you can see here, which means it takes 4 hits for Goba to remove the shield. Next, we have Amber, whose charge attack actually does strong elemental attacks as well, and it only takes 2 charge attacks for Amber to remove the shield. Now, just because the character does weak elemental attacks doesn't mean all of his attacks are weak. For example, for Diluc, using his ultimate means the first hit is a strong elemental attack, and the normal attacks and the E is still a weak elemental attack even with the pyro buff. So it really depends on the attack if it's going to be a strong or weak elemental attack. Now as for Bennett's ultimate, both his E and his Q do strong elemental attacks, so you can see here that when I use them consecutively, it just immediately breaks the shield because both attacks are strong elemental attacks. For Xiangling's ultimate, you can see that the first 2 hits do 2 weak elemental attacks, and then the rotating disc does weak elemental attacks. Now how it usually goes is you use an elemental reaction and both the elements would disappear, but this is not always the case because for some elements and some reactions, when you use a weak elemental attack against a strong elemental gauge, the strong element would linger, allowing you to do maybe consecutive reactions without having to reapply the base element that you need. However, Vaporize and Melt have some exceptions here that I will explain in a bit. First, let me show you how it works with elemental reactions. So first, I'm going to show you using Beidou. Beidou's E does a strong elemental attack, so it will place a strong elemental gauge. Now when you use for example, a weak pyro here and use a strong one, it just immediately disappears and you do not get the lingering effect. Now if you use, for example, Beidou's E first, a strong elemental attack, and a weak pyro next, you will see that the electro hovers a little bit and that it stays for a little while. This means if you use another pyro attack, then you can overload it that means you can overload twice basically. Now if you use a strong elemental attack and another strong elemental attack, then it just disappears completely. Now for Vaporize and Melt, it works a little differently. So as you can see here, we're applying Hydro with Mona's normal attack, and using a weak elemental attack afterwards, we'll have the Hydro effect linger for a bit. This means that if you're, for example, using Goba, you can vaporize twice, as you see here, without having to reapply the Hydro immediately. The caveat of this though is with Vaporize and Melt, there is a 2 times damage reaction and a 1.5 times damage reaction. So if in Vaporize, if you apply Hydro onto a Pyro, that means you get 2 times the damage. If for Melt, if you apply Pyro on a Cryo, you get 2 times the damage. If this application occurs, it will always remove both elements. But if, for example, you do the 1.5 times reaction, as you can see with Diluc and Mona, it will have the lingering Hydro effect because Mona applied a strong elemental attack. So you can see here with Kaya, we're gonna apply Kaya's E is a strong elemental attack, while Diluc's E is a weak elemental attack, but it removes both elements completely after the reaction. But you can see here, if I use Bennett, who has a strong elemental attack, and then follow up with Kaya, who also has a strong elemental attack, you can see that the Pyro element lingers for a little bit, allowing for another melt from a different source. And that is elemental gauges. If you want to go a little more in depth about it, you can check out the Keqing main theory crafting library. The link is in the description down below. But I hope that was informative for you. I hope that you were at least able to learn something from the elemental gauges. It is sort of a hidden mechanic. The only way you'll know if an attack is strong or weak is by testing it yourself. Or you can head over to the Keqing Main's Theory Crafting Library for a more in-depth guide. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that was informative. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Also, we reached 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for your support. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.